So, I'm going to talk about capitalism and means of production. Capitalism is supposed to be based on the free market, but of course we don't have a free market. What we have is a legal market and based on legal ownership of the means of production, which we call private ownership. Private ownership is not personal ownership. Personal ownership is a basic kind of ownership that it exists and is legitimate, basically because we can't delegitimize it without invalidating our own ownership. So we tend to let it persist with other people. But private ownership is another scale on another plane of existence, because it permits someone to own a resource that by rights it could be for personal ownership, personal use, and it could be for the group, but one person has possession of it and he uses it to benefit himself, where by rights it's to benefit everyone. Personal ownership is the resources of the world divided out into individual portions so that we all can each live individually. And if we maintain that level, what we'd have is each person basically living in a kind of a sustainable, low-level technology kind of existence, in which we each more or less made everything we needed ourselves. And I mean, we could have some minimal amount of trading, but there wouldn't be the specialization that forms the basis of a real economy. When we move to the next plane, and instead of one person owning a small portion of land that's suitable for his own use, this person owns maybe 100, several hundred, several thousand, I mean, unlimited amount of land. And because he can't maintain it, he can't actually work it himself, he hires a bunch of other people. But this means that they've given up their ownership claim to this land, this resource, to work this other person's. And this couldn't happen, of course, without the government. This is where the legal ownership comes in. So, and it's why we can't have capitalism without the government, and which is why we don't have free market, because a free market is the economy without legislation, which means without the state. So we have this private ownership which forces people to work for a boss, and this is one step removed from slavery. And depending on how harsh the legislation is and how strict the rules, it can be closer to slavery than actual freedom. So capitalism takes us away from our God-given right to a portion of this planet, and it does this by falsifying the nature of private enterprise, making it seem like it's just a continuation of personal ownership, which is absolutely false. It's a complete disconnect between personal ownership, where I have a small piece of land that I farm, that I might grow plants on, food, have an animal or two, a small dwelling, basically self-sufficiency, to a billionaire that owns islands. I mean, there's no limit to what can be owned by an individual through private ownership. in some ways. I mean, basically it's kind of like a privately owned nation, dictatorship if you like. Only the actual legalese is in somebody else's hands, the state. But the question is, where does the private owner get the right to all this land, this water, sky, air, whatever he owns? I mean, where does he get it but from the government? And where does the government get the authority? The government gets authority through its power, and it may get this power through just actual force of arms, as in a dictatorship, autocracy, or it could get this power through the ballot box, where we vote in a government. This is a very shallow kind of or tenuous. There's a tenuous connection between democracy and the right of the government to hand out ownership, because we vote in the government to look after our interests, and it's not in our interest to have our land owned by a small portion of the population. So the government is actually betraying us, and this is the problem with democracy, because it's the power of the majority, but representative democracies even kind of corrupted that, because it's not just the mass of people get to choose what the minority of people want. It's the mass of people getting to choose a government, the majority of which then gets to decide what the whole nation is going to be under. And so the government legitimizes private ownership, but it's a theft of our basically what is our property. The people own the nation. We own our political jurisdiction. So the individual owns his own personal property, again by default, and just by the fact that nobody wants to challenge this, because they would be challenging their own ownership. But we don't actually have a right to any of this. It's we have a right to what we create, but we didn't create the land, we didn't create the sky, air, whatever. We didn't create any of it. We can create ideas, we can modify designs, and we can modify the land and the physical things, and create new objects, and we own that design, we own that work, but we don't actually own the physical elements that things are made out of. So this is where we go wrong, and why there's such a disconnect between personal ownership and private ownership. And that's not so much recognized, but it does exist. So, but democracy gives governments the power to betray us, and to shift ownership from what should be a public, not a public, because public is a bad word too, because public basically means government ownership, and government has no right to ownership. As I said, we own our political jurisdictions. There's a family ownership of the basic living area, and you have the neighborhood is a small community that we're in, that we own, and we own the town, villages, cities, we own the provinces, we own the municipalities. These are supposed to be under our ownership, the people's ownership. They're like a business. The Bible calls it a church, but it's we would understand it better as a political jurisdiction, or and that each political jurisdiction is a kind of free market or free market economy. The town, the majority of a town's economic activity takes place within the town, with the members of the town working together. the province, or because of the multiplicity of the towns and the regions, the members in a province, their majority of their economic transactions take place within the province or the state. Same with the country. So these things belong to the people. That's our livelihood, as it were. It's all the resources that we occupy that pertains to us and that maintains our life. These belong to us, but we've handed ownership over to the state. And we have the church, or the people, if you want to go into a broader sense, we have to take back this ownership. And capitalism has taken the ownership and concentrated it into a few hands. And we have to reverse this process and take back ownership. And so capitalism doesn't work, and communism doesn't work because that's state ownership. And democracy doesn't work because democracy is why we've lost ownership, why we've lost control of everything. When you have a bunch of people with a small landholding and more or less conducting their business on a face-to-face or very small scale actions, the rich can't so easily accumulate as well. It's because we've voted in a group of people who can, in a room, get together and manipulate everything and hand out ownership to a set of other people. We end up powerless. We end up dispossessed of what we own, which is our nation, our communities. And so what we need to start doing is taking back our power, taking back our ownership. And this will be the subject of later videos, we think, if you're watching this. The problem with capitalism, the problem with democracy.